Lesson 35. We continue with the philosophy of the Kleshas according to Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2, and we have arrived at Sutra 13. As long as the root is there, it must ripen and result in lives of different class, length, and experiences. This sutra is based on the idea that reincarnation is real. There are people who don't believe in reincarnation. I do. Just intuitively it makes sense. So what this means is that, you remember I mentioned probably a couple of times that there is the idea in Buddhism that because of karma, we need to live 1 million reincarnations throughout. We have to live through 1 million lives in order to burn our karma, in order to end our suffering. That is, this sutra is confirming that idea. I come from a family of 7 children. You would think that in the same family, everybody has similar character, similar characteristics. That is far from the truth. We are all very different. We may have something in common, which is the cause or the reason why we were born in that particular family, but all very different. Different characters, different ambitions, different ways of dealing with emotions, different development in our lives. What I did, they would never even think of doing, for example, and I would totally not be interested in the things they have chosen to do. That is because each and every individual has their own set of karma. And regardless of the circumstances in which you are born, that karma will dominate. And in the long term, it will determine your destiny. Our lives is based on ambitions, desires. Yeah? If you have no desire, you will not do anything. A desire is a restlessness that you feel in your belly that makes you do something. So if you are poor, you want to be rich. According to this philosophy, if you were poor in the previous lives, you are born with karma that gives you the desire to not be poor anymore or again. There is something very interesting. You know, since the technology explosion in the world started like 20-25 years ago, we talk about billionaires. Before that, it was about millionaires, but now you have billionaires. Incredibly rich young entrepreneurs. If you look at their background, none of them inherited wealth. None of them inherited large amounts of money. Most of them dropped out of school before they even got a degree. How is it possible they became billionaires? Because they followed their heart. Their karma was so strong, instead of doing what their parents told them to do, their teachers told them to do, the government expects them to do, get a degree, buy a house, get a family, they followed their heart. And they played with technology that became revolutionary, that changed the world. And it made them very, very rich. Even The opposite is also true. People that are born in rich families, when they inherit the wealth, they often lose it afterwards. It is not in their karma to be wealthy. They don't know how to deal with money, so they lose it. Of course, smart families, they will pay smart financial advisors, and they will take care, they will guard the capital. But people that inherit a lot of money, they often lose it. They are not destined to be rich. Maybe they were rich in a previous life and they don't have that desire. It just doesn't work for them. You can see that with people who win the lotto. There are plenty of stories about people who win the lotto. And most of them lose their wealth within a couple of years. Not only that, they experience a lot of misery because they became rich suddenly. Lives destroyed, careers destroyed, family relations destroyed. And in the end, after they lose everything, they sigh in relief and say, I'm happy that it's over. All this money just brought me misery. It was just not meant to be. What is important in all this is that we start following our heart. Because when you follow your heart, you follow your karma. What most people do is not follow their heart. Because other people will tell them that's unstable. No security for the future. You need to get a job, start a career, stay in that career for 40 years until you retire, buy a house, have a family. That is how you have to live your life. But people like you and me, we cannot ignore our karma. It's too strong. Things have happened in our lives that have confronted us. We had to search deep inside ourselves. And yoga made us search inside ourselves. Naturally, self-study occurs. And once you connect with that, you cannot let it go anymore. Life has no meaning anymore if you just do what other people tell you to do and you ignore what you feel deep inside your heart. When you follow your heart, you follow your dharma. Now people think about dharma just like with karma, that is some very mysterious Buddhist concept. But the meaning of dharma is essence. The essence of what? Essence of you. And most people are not connected with their essence. They live a life disconnected from the universe, disconnected from themselves, from their heart's content. Yoga naturally makes you connected. It's part of the process. Because you become more sensitive and more conscious. Dharma and karma are subtle inside you. And because your increased sensitivity and consciousness, you connect with it. You become aware of something. Subtle steerings inside you, subtle energies inside you, that other people are not capable of perceiving. As a result of that, of course, and that is the whole purpose of Buddhism and yoga, is you reduce enormously the million lives that you have to live and suffer. You take a shortcut. Because normal people, out of ignorance, the first klesha, they never learn. They keep making the same mistake again and again, life after life, leading to the tragedy that it takes 1 million reincarnations before we finally find peace. Getting rid of all that karma, burning karma as we call it. So yoga is basically a system that conditions you in a way that you are not ignorant anymore, and as a result of that, you do the work of burning karma in one life that other people take thousands of lives or hundreds of thousands of lives. Sutra 14. They have joy or sorrow for their fruit, according as their cause is virtue or vice. It's all about energy. If your behavior is virtuous, if you portray virtuous behavior, you will attract virtuous acts from the environment. So, according to yoga, you get what you deserve. If you are suffering, it is because you attracted it. That is yoga philosophy. That is very sad in a way. If people are really hurt, harmed, for example, in case of abuse, and you say something like this, that's very hurtful. Because of ego, because of emotion, and you can say, what did I do wrong? Of course. Karma is not so simple. Because karma is not only personal. We talked about this before when I said, you know, I'm Dutch. And the Dutch had a struggle with water. I didn't have a problem with water in my life. But like yesterday again, I went to the park, the drains were clogged. I look for a stick to unclog the drains. I just have to do that. Otherwise the water just piles up and the park becomes a swamp. And I'm very aware of that. I could just walk away from it. I choose not to do that. It's very satisfying to give in to that feeling. It's my karma. Why did I get here? Let's go back to the sutra. If you behave in nasty ways, unfriendly ways, nasty and unfriendly things will happen to you. I remember why I got there. It's important actually. It's about karma. Why do innocent people get hurt? Why are people in Israel killed, tortured, raped, and in Palestine, in Gaza? What? They didn't do anything wrong. What is their karma? It's not a personal karma, it's a national karma or a geographic karma. What happened in Europe during the Second World War with the killing of 6 million Jews and tens of millions of civilians during that war, that will for hundreds of years determine life for many people, for many generations. I'm a product of the Second World War. I was born in 1964, 19 years after the end of the Second World War. So you would think that I'm not affected by it, but I am. Because my father was affected by it, because my mother was affected by it, and they raised me in the way that, to their best ability probably. And that has made me who I am. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't ask for all the misery. But I am also part of that geographic location that has underwent a certain event in history that reverberates for many years to come. And as part of that, people fall victim. And you see in families also, family have also generational karma. Abuse, for example, is something that goes from one generation to another, until one person stands up and says, I break the cycle. You recognize this? This is a very sad thing, because the person that was abused and suffered from it becomes the next abuser. Out of all people, that person that suffered the abuse must know how terrible it is to do that to other people. They just can't help it. It's their karma. They can't help it. And you know what often happens when people start practicing yoga? They break the cycle. I've had many students over the years who wanted to talk with me about their problems, their emotions, and it very often involved a situation like that. And they had the awareness, the consciousness that they should not engage in the behavior that hurt them. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, also sexual abuse. The abused often, most of the times actually, becomes the abusers. It's in their memory, that's their samskara. The consciousness that yoga develops leads to those people making a conscious decision. No, I will put a stop to this, I will end this cycle of abuse. But then, they have this situation where they refuse to abuse the next generation, their children, but they have that feeling inside. So there is a war going on inside them. They feel conflict. And that is when they come to me and say, what should I do? And I encourage them. I explain rationally what has happened, what is happening, and that they have many reasons to be proud of themselves. After many generations, hundreds of years of abuse from generation to generation to generation, they now have the power to end that cycle. And that is usually enough for them to know that what they are doing is right, and that's enough for them to be able to deal with that internal conflict. So karma is not two-dimensional. Most people, if you ask, do you know what karma means? They say, yeah, if I do something bad, then bad things will happen to me. That is only 5% of what karma means. The world is a living organism that is subjected to karma. You have group karma, you have national karma, you have geographical karma. Korean people have their own karma. Japanese, that is why populations are different. That is why Dutch people are different from the Germans and the Belgians, even though we are neighbors. And Korean people are different from the Chinese and the Japanese. So that's national karma. That explains a little bit how an innocent person can be a victim. Because on the surface, it doesn't make sense. Because you say, what did that child do wrong to deserve this? You're part of that group karma. You had the misfortune to be born there. How do you deal with that? You try to turn it into something positive. You try to avoid feeling like a victim. Based on the consciousness that you have, you make a choice in life and you say, I'm not going to go along with this. That is how you deal with also this cycle of kleshas leading to misery. This is the philosophy of misery, the science of misery. You make the conscious choice not to go along with it anymore. You're not going to engage in behavior that harmed you. And you do that by following your heart. And every time when you're confronted with your memory, with your urge to do something bad, you refuse to do that and you replace it by something positive. That's what happens when you follow your heart. You become passionate about something that attracts you strongly. It's why I became a yoga teacher. I did something positive with my misery, canalizing it into yoga and helping thousands of people deal with their own misery. I like watching documentaries. BBC and CNN have documentaries about people who have ended up doing something amazing in life. It's always about nature, about people, about animals. It's people that got terribly hurt in war, in conflict. And instead of feeling the victim, they have turned their hurt into passion and compassion. And that is what the yogi does too. That is what you will do too. Yoga naturally leads to that transformation. That's why yoga is not only healing, it is transformative. It truly leads to transformation in a very powerful way. When you are confronted with misery, nasty people, unfriendly people, then remember this sutra. I have done this too. For many years I was confronted with unfriendly neighbors at home, but also when I had my own yoga studio. And knowing how it works, instead of complaining about them, I looked at myself and I asked myself, what am I doing that they are behaving like this? And I changed. Deliberately, I started doing things differently, in more friendly ways, less aggressive, less abrasive, less ambitious. And it just totally changes how people react to you. It was not their fault, I caused it. You understand that? And when you do positive acts, do positive things, friendly things, the environment will react in kind to that. And when you understand that, you will have the same stupid smile on your face as I have. Because it's all in your control. It's all up to you. Not easy, but that is why we have yoga and the philosophy to make us aware of how all this works. Sutra 15, describing one of the diseases of the disciple, basically. To the people who have developed discrimination, all is misery on account of the pains resulting from change, anxiety, and tendencies, as also on account of the conflicts between the functioning of the gunas and the vrittis. Gunas are tamas, rajas, and sattva, so the energy condition and the functioning or the fluctuations of those. Vrittis is the subconscious mind flow that is 24 hours a day whispering things into your ears. To the people who have developed discrimination, this is about you. Discrimination is consciousness, sensitivity. This sutra is telling us that people who develop consciousness and sensitivity suffer. That is why we call it a disease of the disciple. In religion, in Christianity, you call it atonement. Atonement for your sins. Ignorant people, they don't have sins. Yes, they have them, but they are not aware of them. So there is nothing to suffer for them. Ignorance is bliss, they say. That is where that expression comes from. Ignorance is bliss. But when you become conscious, as a result of yoga or any kind of other spiritual practice, you also become conscious of your misbehaviors, of your failures, of your vices, of your sins, as it is called in religion. And then because you're conscious of that and you know that it's not good, you start to suffer. So it's called the atonement of the spiritual person. So not only in yoga this is recognized, every philosophy and religion recognizes the fact that when you become more sensitive and conscious, it can lead to suffering. And why is this important? Because you have in Christianity, you have there are some extreme forms of religious expression where people punish themselves for their sins. It's called flagellation. Flagellation in Christianity, people will whip themselves until they are bleeding, until their skin breaks open and they are bleeding. They think they need to suffer for their sins. That is, of course, a very cynical way of dealing with your internal conflicts. There is a much more positive, it's a very negative way of dealing with the issue that you become more sensitive and conscious. That's not very constructive to hurt yourself, to harm yourself even more, inflicting pain on yourself. We have learned the yamas and the niyamas. We have learned to accept that we are only human. We have our flaws. We have made mistakes in the past. We can't go back to the past, but what we can do, because we are now more conscious, is choose to do better. Try to avoid the mistakes from the past. And sometimes you will succeed, sometimes you will fail. And when you fail, you don't punish yourself with whips and pain. You try to learn something from it so that you become wiser, stronger, and more mature. That is the growth process that you are in as a spiritual practitioner. And that is how you deal with that increased misery that this sutra is talking about. That every person who becomes more sensitive and conscious, the person who has developed discrimination, has to suffer. Yes, but you need to turn that suffering into something constructive, into something positive, by changing your behavior, by doing something constructive and positive with it. A choice, that is a choice you have to make. Do you know Vikings? Have you watched Vikings? No? Throughout the centuries, throughout the history of mankind, people have dealt with these issues. That is why we have the legacy of the philosophy of yoga. But yoga is kind of the philosophy that stands out around the world. But every continent, every culture has their own deep insights based on contemplation. Now, watching Vikings, which is based on historical facts, the Vikings is a story that plays in the year 800, 900 after Christ, where the Vikings from Sweden, Denmark, Norway started to invade other countries. They would get into their boats and sail to England, for example. They conquered the whole of England. So the king of the Vikings became, although he was in prison, in captivity, he had a chemistry with the king of England. The Viking was called Ragnar, and the king of England, I forgot his name, but King Egbert. Historical figures. And although they were each other's enemies, they were functioning on an intellectual and spiritual level that made them connect with each other. So King Egbert every time would go down to the basement where King Ragnar was kept in a cage, imprisoned, and he would sit down and talk with him, have conversations with him. And in some episode, this is what King Egbert said. All is vanity and vexation of spirit. In such wisdom is much grief. And he that increases knowledge increases sorrow, suffering. That's the same as this sutra. Very wise. But the point here is that you must not interpret this in a negative way and simply just suffer because the philosophy tells you that that is what is going to happen. That is very fatalistic and passive. It is better to take an active approach and do something with it. Do something with your new insights. The reason why we suffer is again because of ego. We identify with the pain, the emotion, and so we say, oh, I'm so pitiful. We have self-pity. That is very, very unconstructive. But it is ego that leads to that. The yoga is warning, this sutra is warning to be aware of that and not allow that to happen. Just stay practical and positive and do something with your new insights. That was the last sutra for this session. Do you have any questions? All right. After asana, we will learn a new pranayama, so we will read from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, but after asana, before the meditation. Let's have a short break.